Hey, Nicole Mashburn here again, and we're going to continue learning about anatomy and physiology. And our next topic is going to be the tissues. And when I talk about tissues, I'm not talking about Kleenex. What I'm talking about are the things that make up our bodies. So what is a tissue? A tissue is a group of cells that are similar in their structure and their function. So, for example, in your skin, you have a bunch of skin cells. They have a similar shape, a similar structure, and they are connected together. They work together to make your outside covering. Okay, so a tissue is simply a living fabric. It's a group of cells that work together for a common function. Blood would be an example of a tissue. You have a lot of red blood cells. They're inside the plasma, the liquid part of the blood, that acts as a tissue that allows you to carry oxygen throughout your blood. When we study tissues, we call that histology. So histology is a study of the tissues. And when you look at the histology, when you look at tissues, you'll find that the different tissues have different types of cells and they have a different type of matrix. And that's what the cells are kind of embedded in. So you may have a liquid matrix, you may have a solid matrix. So for example, blood would be a liquid matrix, bone would be a solid matrix. And we're going to talk about the different types of tissues and what type of cells make up the tissues and what kind of matrix is also a part of that tissue. When we think of tissues, the first thing we want to learn are the four major types. So I'm going to introduce these four major types to us now, and then we're going to talk about specifically the different types of those tissues. Okay, so the four main types are your epithelial tissues, your connective tissues, your muscular tissues, and your nervous tissues. That's your four main categories. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the different types of tissues. You're going to get more detail in a future video. Okay, this is just a real brief overview of the four types. Your epithelial tissues, these are your boundary and lining cells or lining tissues. So these are things that make boundaries. So for example, your skin is the boundary between you and the outside world. You have epithelial tissue that lines the organs or lines the mouth. So all the stuff inside your mouth, the oral cavity, that's an example of epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is also used for secretion and absorption. We're going to talk about sweat glands and oil glands and things like that. Connective tissue, I call this the glue, and this is what basically supports and binds us together. There's examples of connective tissue would be bone and blood and fat. There's many types of connective tissue. We're going to go into those in more detail in another video. A big difference between epithelial tissue and connective tissue is the number of cells in the matrix. Epithelial tissue has a lot of cells and very little matrix, whereas connective tissue has fewer cells and lots of matrix. Okay, and we'll talk about that in more detail as we move forward. But again, just think of connective tissue as kind of the scaffolding. It kind of helps form our body, gives our body shape, and kind of holds us together. The last two major types of tissue is your nervous and muscle. Nervous tissue is for communication. This is the electrical system of our body. So our brain and spinal cord and all of our nerves are examples of nervous tissue. And then our muscle. And this muscle contracts, allows us to move. And we actually have three types of muscle tissue. We have muscle that moves bone, which we call skeletal muscle. We have muscle that moves things through tubes, which we call smooth muscle, and we have muscle that forms the heart, which is called cardiac muscle. And again, we'll talk about these in more detail in another video. These types of muscle can also be voluntary or involuntary, and I'm not going to tell you which one is which yet. I want you to think about it. We'll talk about it in another video, but just think about which one of these three types of muscle do you think is voluntary before I actually tell you. I want you to think about it. All right, so when we think about tissues, you have to think about those levels of organization. So if you go back to Unit 1, we talked about how you take atoms and you make molecules, and then molecules form compounds, and compounds form organelles, and organelles form cells, then cells form tissues, and then we take different types of tissues to make an organ. So this is an example. This is a cross-section where we're looking at the skin to the muscle. So I don't remember, yeah, this is a pork shoulder. So this is a shoulder of a pig, and so that would be the organ. The shoulder would be the organ, and this shoulder is made up of multiple types of tissues. You have epithelial tissue making the skin. You have a layer of fat connective tissue, and then you have muscle. So these are three different types of tissues that are making up this organ. And if you could take a microscope and kind of really get down and look in it, you might actually find some nerves. So there actually could be some nervous system, nervous tissue as part of this shoulder as well. We just can't see it in this picture. Your heart's made up of cardiac muscle. There's fat associated with your heart. There's nervous tissue associated with your heart. There's lining, there's epithelial tissue associated with your heart. So most of our organs are made up of a combination of all four different types of connective tissue to make our organs. Here's an example of the intestines. So if you look inside the intestinal wall, you'll see that you have a layer of muscle. You have a connective tissue layer, and then inside, lining that tube, you have epithelial tissue. And again, you're going to have some kind of nervous system, nerves that come out and innervate that tissue as well, so that the small intestine or large intestine move fast or slow. So again, all your organs are going to be made up of a combination of these different types of tissues. You're going to have epithelial tissues, connective tissues, muscle tissues, and nervous tissues in most cases. Again, we're going to do another video going into more detail about the different types of tissues and specific places in the body where you'd expect to find them. Okay? So that's all I'm going to do now. It's a short video, and I will see you later talking about epithelial tissues.